for every policy maker here in the country, just for you to see how much the people really want of you. Well, the president said just recently, specifically on Monday, asking everyone to bring up policy that will help in creating jobs for the people. So in looking at that this morning, we're joined by Mr. Sam Ikoku. He's a productivity consultant to look at these and many other issues towards job creation. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Well, we had the president talk about this on Monday, and he did say, he warned, he said, we'll risk a revolution if we don't create jobs for the people.
Well, I think he was right. Absolutely right. The only challenge we have is we're talking about job creation now. This was an election promise, and we're hoping that now that he's come around to this, they can speed up the process, because he's very correct. We have to have jobs for the economy to grow and for the youth to channel their energies in a positive direction.
You know, when we talk about job creation, sometimes we get to hear governments of different states and agencies and parastatals come up to say, we've just given jobs to maybe 10,000 youth, so we've given jobs to X amount of people. Is that what it means when it talks about job creation?
No, I don't think that's what it means. I think some of those jobs we hear about are temporary measures. They're political statements, if you ask me. The truth is we have to have the right infrastructure. We have to have a growing economy. We've got to have the infrastructure to make sure that people are sustainably employed. And this is important. It's not a stopgap thing. And I find it challenging because I think we're seeing the privatization of government. And I think when we started privatizing industries, when we started moving towards open competitive economies, government was basically taking itself out of the job creation process and allowing that to be driven by the private sector. So when I hear government saying we're creating jobs, I get a little bit confused. I think government should create policies and programs to enable the private sector drive job creation, and I think that's what's really important.
What do you mean when you say government has been privatized, as it were?
Well, starting from the time of Margaret Thatcher, and where you had privatization of industries, you see, what we thought was the public enterprises are not being run optimally, and because they are not being run optimally, it would be better to give them to private sector-led companies, for example. So there will be more competition, there will be creation of jobs, there will be growth in those industries. That hasn't happened in Nigeria, unfortunately. But that was the thinking. The thought then was, for example, if Nigeria Airways had been privatized and had succeeded, we probably would have 300 aircraft.
Many people would disagree with you about the success or otherwise of the privatization process. Many people point fingers at the telecom sector as maybe the most glaring example that affects our everyday lives about how privatization has been successful.
Well, the telecom sector is about deregulation of an industry, not privatization. Privatization is where you take a government industry, for example, take Nitel specifically, even though it's in telecom, and you sell it to private investors so that they can run it properly. That's different. Deregulating an industry is different from privatizing. Privatizing is taking a publicly owned enterprise, for example, by government, and giving it over to private sector so it can be run more optimally. That's what it really means.
Well, you will agree that they are closely linked, privatization and deregulation. Do you really believe, are you of the opinion that government really has no business in business?
Ultimately, I don't think government should have business in business. There are some things that government must be involved in. For example, healthcare, for example, education. But things like telecommunications, road maintenance, for example, manufacturing and stuff like that, government should not be involved. Because it now becomes a case of, for example, take federal character. We employ people because we want everybody to be represented, not because they are productive and stuff like that. So I think that there's a sort of middle ground. There's some things government must do so that it's fair and covers everybody, but there are other things that are better run by private enterprise.
Let's look at those things that government must do. For instance, let's taking a cue from China. China does one thing: is China establishes domestic demand, as in what the people demand, the things that the needs of the people, the needs of the country domestically. In doing that, they are able to open no which areas they are going to need jobs to be created and where they're going to need investment. Do you think the Nigerian government has done any of this?
We're beginning to do that. If you look at, I know a lot of people say, Vision 2020 and all of that. We've heard it before with Vision 2010. But we're seeing a return to planning. With 2020, a lot of statistics have been looked at, a lot of the underlying infrastructure and factors that are there. Planning is becoming a key part of allocation of resources to ministries, departments, and agencies. It's beginning to happen.
Okay, sorry to butt in here, but can you compare that to implementation? Because planning didn't just start. We've had the Ministry of National Planning for a while now, and we've been planning before now. We've had NEEDS, we've had Operation Feed the Nation, we have Green Revolution, all sorts of plans, all sorts of vision statements and plans to help move the nation forward. But the area of implementation.
Well, first and foremost, I must say that I'm one of those people who's not particularly happy because we've had things like you said, Operation Feed the Nation and all of that stuff. And it's frustrating that you have good programs, good policies, and they just flame out after some time. But I think what we're seeing now is we're getting the facts, we're getting the statistics, we're getting the figures to make planning scientific, so to speak. And I think that in the next few years, we should be able to see results if intelligent leadership is kept in the planning function, for example, and statistics are followed and budgets are allocated based on priorities.
So that's a conditional statement there. Now, you work with loads and loads of youth on a daily basis. So what's the cry of the people? Because the president asking people to come up with these policies, it then means that he needs more and more innovative ideas to drive all of this job creation process, so that this revolution he talks about shouldn't come to fruition.
I don't think a revolution will come if transformation is really pursued. And there's a difference here. Mr. President is saying we should come up with policies. I would have thought there were policies in waiting. I would have thought this planning should have been done before ministers were appointed, for example, because people should be appointed based on a program, a plan. They must have capabilities, they must have proven themselves in the past. Well, having said that, we're happy that he's coming to it. Better late than never. Policies are good, and they should be formulated, but we should really be focused on transformation. We're not looking to do the things we've been doing before and doing them slightly better. We're looking to do things we've never done before, change the context completely, so that we get results that we never had in the past. We've got millions and millions of youth who are not doing anything.
Are there things we haven't done before?
Well, we've always had, take for example, government comes up and has this policy and it puts people there and then funds the policy and then waits for years and years to do a recalibration, for example, or analysis of whether it's performing or not. And that's not good enough. What we need to do now is to say, okay, look, we want to create jobs, we want to create wealth, for example. Let's get everybody on the table. Let's get people to do what they need to do. Let's get people to make contributions. Let's get people listened to. You don't just listen to your ministers. They're cocooned out there.
But these are things that we've always done, because specifically, let's look at two key agencies. For instance, we have the NDE, the National Directorate of Employment, as well as you talk about creating jobs or creating wealth for people. We also remember NAPEP. They say they want to take off poverty out of the land. So how well can you rate these two agencies and say, well, they fared well to the extent that the president is also still asking people for more policies that will change things positively?
Well, let's not confuse policies with programs. I think you've just talked about some programs. There's been a policy for job creation. The programs have not been necessarily successful. There are certain things we do that can't build our economy. Take poverty eradication, for example. You give people basic equipment to do certain things. They probably feed themselves, feed their families, for example, and so on. I don't think that's enough. We should look at our country and say, what's our sustainable advantage? Job creation shouldn't just be for today, but should be giving the country progressive advantage as you go along, so that government does not always have to come back and try and jumpstart the system. The system should have some sort of traction on its own. And this is important. And when you look at these agencies you've mentioned, I mean, frankly, I'm sure they have their own problems, but the results have not been stellar. And we hope that, with the new outlook of government, better results would